the Pro Football Focus Fantasy Podcast. My name is Jeff Ratcliffe, and it is Monday, May 11th. And people are losing their minds, as they tend to do when it comes to football news, about the Philadelphia Eagles, because the Eagles are perhaps interested in Carlos Hyde. My buddy Adam Kaplan reported earlier today that the Eagles have interest in him, or maybe more broadly put, they have interest in a veteran, I think is the best way to put it. They want somebody else in that backfield, and when you consider the backfield, this is not a knock on Miles Sanders whatsoever. This is not one of those things where now we have to freak out, lose our minds over Miles Sanders. Miles Sanders is not a bell cow back in the true sense of the word, a guy who's going to command 350 touches. He isn't. And I think this is a very fitting topic for today because we actually are going to talk about bell cow backs from last year. And I can actually tell you where Sanders ranked last year using expected fantasy points as our metric here for gauging bell cows. But they don't want to do that with Sanders. He's not that type of back. He's a back who's going to get you 15 touches a game, and those are going to be quality touches, and we saw how effective he can be, but do they really want to feed him 20-plus touches a game? Unlikely. So getting a guy like Carlos Hyde in who can contribute in early down is basically what you're doing is you're kind of swapping in what you kind of had with Jordan Howard, maybe hopefully get more of a full season out of whoever you swap in, but you're filling that role in your offense. And I think that's something that fantasy players overlook so frequently. Teams, they're not playing fantasy football, although Howie Roseman, the way he trades sometimes seems like fantasy football, but these teams, what they're doing is they have set roles in their offense, and they're getting guys to fill those roles in a lot of instances. So in this instance here, the team obviously views that short yardage, early down, back as a role that they need to fill, and it looks like they may try and fill it. It's not an indictment at all on Miles Sanders. What it would do for me, and I know that people have looked at my rankings, I have Miles Sanders inside my top 10, and they've said that that's a little too high, and I get it. But the thing is, there's nobody else to give the touches to right now. I went through the same problem with Courtland Sutton before the draft. There was nobody to give the targets to, so he came in higher than I really thought he should. At one point, Courtland Sutton was like my number 11 before the draft. Now it's all changed with Judy in there and Hamler to a lesser extent. But with Sanders, where should he probably really be? He should probably be a front-end RB2. But there's nobody else to give the touches to right now. So if they brought in somebody like Hyde, it wouldn't tank Sanders' fantasy value whatsoever. I would move Sanders down to a front-end RB2. That's really, and still, he'd be, 13, 14, still be in a very quality range. So don't freak out there, especially if you have Miles Sanders in Dynasty, and if you have somebody in your Dynasty leagues who is freaking out about this and has Miles Sanders. Try to trade for Miles Sanders. It's really that simple. But anyway, I wanted to talk a little bit about bell cow backs to kick off the week here. And so bell cow it's a phrase, but it's not really a technical term. It's not like we can say, well, based on percentages, then he is a bell cow or he isn't a bell cow. We don't really have that. I typically view bell cow guys, though, historically as guys who are going to be in that 18 to 20 plus touch per game range, but it's a fluid term. However, I wanted to look at things not in terms of touches, but in terms of overall production, at least in a sort of average sense. And so the best way to do that, to look at how a player should be producing, is to use expected fantasy points. Expected fantasy points is a number we've talked about on the pod before, but really all it is we take the location down in distance, and if you're talking about receivers, we take the target depth, and we compare those historically to any other player who has had the touches in those exact same situations, and what have they produced on average. So what is the average for a running back who is receiving a carry at his own 45-yard line, third down and 4? What's the average? What's the average for a receiver with the line of scrimmage is at his own 30-yard line and the target depth is 15 yards? What is the average amount of fantasy points he scores? So that way you can establish the expected number. And we have numbers that go all the way back to 2006. So we have a lot of data there. So anyway, using this, I wanted to then see what percentage do these guys have of running back expected fantasy points. Last year, the leader is not a surprise. And you don't even have to have me tell you, but I'll tell you anyway. It was Christian McCaffrey. Of the expected fantasy points in the Carolina backfield, he scored 92.2% of them. There was nobody else there. And in fact, among some of the other top names, other guys who aren't surprising. Leonard Fournette was second, 81.5%. 80.1% for Ezekiel Elliott, 73.5% for Le'Veon Bell. There were nobody in those backfields. I mean, I guess Zeke had Tony Pollard, but we knew the team was going to ride Zeke regardless of who they had back there. The one flaw to this, obviously, is, hey, if there were injuries, then yeah, these numbers are going to be skewed. But at least on the surface, we get a sense of, who is producing the most in their backfield. And the beauty to using fantasy points as opposed to production is we are accounting for yards, we're accounting for touchdowns and receptions. So it's it's very similar to the dominator rating thing that I was talking about with college football. So obvious names, Saquon, even though he was injured, still 73.1%, Gurley 70.7%, Chris Carson 65.7%, Nick Chubb 65.6. So that's a good number right there. Now, granted, it was half the season without Hunt. I didn't pull up his numbers after that point, with Hunt, but either way, still a decent number there. I will say, though, I'm getting a lot of attention about Nick Chubb. I have Chubb ranked at 10, and there have been people on social media who are suggesting that I'm too low on him. I don't think so. If anything, I might be a tad too high on him. Now, here's the deal. Before we go out and start freaking out about what I just said, I'm talking about fantasy football. I'm not talking about NFL football. NFL football, he's one of the best early down runners in the game. No doubt about it. Fantasy football, he's in a backfield committee where he's not going to get a lot of work passing down situations. Kareem Hunt, as they showed last year, and we don't know if Kareem Hunt's going to get suspended this year, by the way, because that could still happen from the off-field incident where he was pulled over. But either way, if he's on the field, he's going to get more. He's going to dominate the targets in the backfield. So that puts a cap on what Nick Chubb can do. And given that most people are in half-point or full-point PPR, you're putting a cap on Nick Chubb. So, again, we have to be careful. I know people will see my rankings. They'll think I'm like, slighting a guy. But how dare you rank him at 10? I'm not slighting him in the least. I think he's freaking awesome. I've been a huge Nick Chubb fan since he's entered the league. Since that game against the Oakland Raiders when he's making cuts on a dime on the infield dirt in Oakland. Been a big fan. But you got to look at this for what it is. You got to look at it at the committee situation that it is. Anyway, after Chubb, Aaron Jones, 63.1%, which is actually a little bit higher than I thought it was going to be because they did use a lot of Jamal Williams last year, so that's a good sign. Dow Cook, 61%. Kamara, I like where Kamara came in. Even with being hurt, 60.2%, that is pretty solid. That's number 12. In this number here. So you would say from a bell cow standpoint, Kamara's close in this range. He's very close in this range. I am more confident in, my slightly higher ranking in Kamara after seeing this number. He's a guy who, if he somehow slips to the middle of the first round, I'm going to scoop him up because I'd take him as early as 4. Maybe 5. It's tricky. So 1 is easy. It's McCaffrey. 2, you may have a debate. I think a lot of people are just going to automatically take Saquon there, but I think you could make a debate for Michael Thomas. Michael Thomas at 3 if you don't take him at 2. Then it's Zeke or it could be Kamara. I mean, I have no issue with Zeke. It's just there's only one football and there's so many mouths to feed now. Do they change anything as a result? I have no issue with taking Zeke there, but I think the earliest you could consider Kamara at 4. Probably 5. If he falls to 6, I'm happy. If somebody takes Dal Cook ahead of him, I'm happy. If he falls to 7, thank you. I will play in this league until I die. Until the day I die, I will stay in this league if you're going to keep letting him fall that far. Anyway, Devonta Freeman, right after Kamara at number 13, he's 57.4%. There wasn't anybody else there, so there is that. But he's still on the street right now. We'll see if he gets signed anywhere. Mark Ingram at 56.7%. Phil Lindsay, this one is going to change. 54%. Could see, the question is Gordon going to be in this range or is he going to be higher? Now, Gordon, to be fair, is lower on this. He's at 39.6% because of partially the holdout, but also because Austin Eckler is at 51.1%. I mean, they were giving a ton of work to him. But does it work out that way where Phil Lindsay gets work? It's not a 70-30, but maybe a 60-40. If it works out that way, then we could have some problems. There could be some people who end up being disappointed in Melvin Gordon. I don't think it works out that way, but the way they used Lindsay in the past, you got to figure they're still going to give him a healthy workload, but depends on how healthy. The aforementioned Carlos Hyde, 51.8%, is just a step ahead of Austin Eckler, who I just said, and then right behind Carlos Hyde. So Hyde was 16 on this list from last year. 18 was Miles Sanders at 50%. Now, do they feel confident with him at 50%? Maybe. I mean, you could still have him at 50%, and then Carlos Hyde comes in at like 30, 35%, and then, fill in the blanks with the rest of the backfield. Boston Scott, Corey Clement, whoever. Could be. I'm not worried about Sanders. David Montgomery, 49.6%. Josh Jacobs, 46.2%. Was a little dinged up at the end of the season, but that number was actually lower than I thought it was going to be, even with the missed time there at the end of the season. Not really worried there. I just wish there was a pathway to more touches in the passing game for Jacobs. We're just not seeing that with Richard, and especially if they use Bowden in the passing game. That puts a cap on Jacobs. As much as I love him, it puts a cap on him. Speaking of a cap, Devin Singletary. All right, so 46%. He's number 21 on this list. Was splitting with Frank Gore, who comes in at 42%. The question is, do they use Moss as Gore? So does that mean Singletary's basically in the same range, and then Moss is right there where Gore is in the 35 to 40% range? If that's the case, Devin Singletary, he's going to be very frustrating. And beyond that, it really highlights, so I've been on record numerous times saying, Zach Moss is not, I repeat, is not Devin Singletary's handcuff. He is not his handcuff. This is in horse racing, what they would call a 1 and 1A situation, right? Those are beautiful. You could bet on the 1 and either horse comes in, you win. But we're not going to be able to do that here. Just bet on the 1. If 1A wins, you still win. Not going to be able to do that here. You're going to have to bet on one of these horses very likely. And it's going to be tricky. I don't like this backfield right now. And I don't think, if I'm in a dynasty league, I keep hearing people saying, well, I own Singletary, so I should draft Moss. I don't know about that. I'm not in love with the idea of having both pieces of a full-blown committee in my dynasty in a dynasty league. In fact, I'm in a dynasty league where I'm in talks right now to trade away Devin Singletary. 2 months ago, would not have been in those talks. But after the Moss pick, it just sounds like an extremely frustrating committee situation that I don't really want a part of. So I'm doing my best to work an angle here. This is a league where we don't actually have a rookie draft yet. They always do that in the end of May. It's usually like right around the May-June turn. So it's coming up. Have some time to talk. And I am in talks of unloading Singletary. I do not view this as a handcuff situation. For Singletary owners, I think we got to be very concerned right now and very cautious about how we proceed. And I don't think this... Sure, if Singletary got hurt and you drafted Moss, yeah, you look like a genius, but I think that's the only scenario where we're actually very confident in starting one or the other this year. If they're both healthy, it's going to be frustrating. And go back to last year, even when they were starting to ramp up Singletary, when Frank Gore would get, 14 carries. 14 carries for like 45 yards. But still, when he would get those carries, it was so frustrating that he was getting all those touches. I think it's going to be just as frustrating this year. I'll give you a couple more here. Adrian Peterson, 45.7%. Tariq Cohen, 44.7%. So both he and Montgomery over 40% and almost over 45% there for Cohen. Duke Johnson, 44.5%. That's a big number. I think it does come down a little bit with David Johnson in there, but that number came in higher than I thought. That backfield was basically all Duke Johnson and Carlos Hyde. We got to hope that David Johnson's number is higher than Carlos Hyde's. It's got to be higher than 51.8%. RB 16 on this list. You'd want David Johnson to be a little bit higher to give you a bang for your buck. Speaking of David Johnson, he was all the way down at 28. Not a big surprise that he was that far down. 40.5%. However, Kenyon Drake was right there with him, even though he was only on the team for, half the season at 40%. Who did I miss here? Marlon Mack was in between at 44.3%, and then Royce Freeman. Royce Freeman was higher than I thought. 41%. Pretty high. One other one before I get out of here today. Be a shorter pod today. Ronald Jones. Who? Ron Jones. 39.6%. If you're a millennial and you don't know what that reference means, look it up, okay? Look up Mike Jones, okay? Anyway, Ronald Jones, 39.6%. The Rojo Thumpers are out in full force on Twitter. I'm not buying it. You don't draft a running back on day 2 of the NFL draft if you are confident that your incumbent is going to take a leap forward. David Montgomery, for example. The Bears did not draft a running back on day 2. Perhaps they were confident that David Montgomery is going to take a step forward. The Bucs took a running back. And even more so, this is not Ronald Jones isn't a Bruce Arians guy. He wasn't a Bruce Arians pick. Now Bruce Arians made a pick. They got a guy. Keyshawn Vaughn, I think we really can't underestimate it. I know the Rojo Thumpers are out there, but I don't think we should be thumping Rojo right now. And these numbers don't bode particularly well for him. So anyway, hey, this is going to turn into a post at pff.com tomorrow, so you can check that out on the website. And in the meantime, you can follow along on social media at Jeff Ratcliffe on Twitter and Instagram. Tomorrow on the show, strength of schedule stuff. I didn't forget about it. I didn't forget about it. We'll be talking about it tomorrow on the show, and we'll start with the sexy ones up front. Tomorrow, running back strength of schedule. All right? I will catch you on the flip side to talk some running backs, some more running backs for you. For PFF, I'm Jeff Ratcliffe, and I'm out of here.